Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is my VermiBag Mini. It's a continuous flow through worm bag. It sits up here in this wooden frame, and today the system has reached 300 days of age. Yay! Happy 300 days in service. It's been fed 24 times, so I was preparing to come in here with feeding number 25. But before we do that, that little blue bottle that I've got over there is meant to help me combat a situation going on here within this system with flying insects. And one of the techniques used to deal with flying insects in the worm bins is applying Mosquito Dunks solution. And Mosquito Dunks is what I've got in this little bottle. And I usually want to apply this stuff before disrupting the uppermost top surface of the system that I'm trying to treat with this stuff, because to me it just seems like that's the place where the creatures that I'm trying to target are hanging out, most likely. Although, you know, I am reminded of a previous situation, again in a VermiBag. That was in my VermiBag tote, where we noticed the same situation going on, and what I found was in certain places where the stitching of the system has a little bit of like a flap or an overlap, there's places for the flying insects to crawl in underneath that little flap and hang out. So I've actually been thinking that perhaps even giving a little shot up into these little openings might be a place to get even more of them. And you know, that might actually be what's happening here, because it does seem like I kind of stirred up a little bit of flying insect activity just by doing this. So, I mean, yeah, a couple check-ins ago we sort of acknowledged the presence of this situation, and then I think last time it was even gauged as getting worse. So I'm not sure if there's a point at which we're going to start seeing it get better. I don't know. Maybe it is a little bit better than it was last time. It did seem pretty bad last time. But yeah, I mean, all you got to do is look around, and it's probably visible on the camera. There's just little shiny wings of flying insects crawling all over the place. And it's quite a nuisance. I'm really worried about them making their way into other systems of mine. For now, it seems like this is probably the only place where I've really seen a notable amount of flying insect activity. So, last time we fed, we positioned the feeding down the middle as we normally do. Sometimes in my bus bin systems, I move the feeding zone from one end of the bin to the other, but systems like this that are almost round or just square in shape, there just doesn't seem to be a this end or a that end. It just seems like the center is probably the best place to position feedings. So I've got this little clear tray here. I thought that perhaps we can really quickly remove some of these larger items that are in this system. Very slow composting large items. This here was a chunk of pumpkin or gourd, little gourd. Here's the fairly huge stem of a pumpkin. And looks like a couple wormies are coming along for the ride here with us. Nice, plump, healthy looking worms. Well, let's just use this quick excavation and extraction of large, slow composting materials as a reason to also kind of excavate the outer edge to see how the material up against the bag is holding up from a moisture perspective. It was only a few weeks ago that much cooler temperatures were causing my furnace to run and the heat to be operating here in the house. And if you have a forced hot air heating system like I do, then you'll know that the air in the house does have a tendency to dry out a bit from the climate control. blowing. But now that that's been kind of dormant for the most part, I mean, maybe at night it'll kick on once in a while on a cooler evening, but definitely starting to feel much warmer temperatures. Approaching Memorial Day here in mid-May or mid to late May in central New Jersey. A transformation of the temperature and the climate is happening from wintry, cool weather to nice, warm, humid Jersey summers. So here's another gourd, and this one feels like it's chock full of stuff. You know, that little red spot on this this worm is so unusual, something I'm not used to seeing. Almost made me wonder if I had pierced my finger and if I was bleeding. So I wonder what that red coloration is. I don't know. Sometimes I might be able to shake the inside, the material that's in this gourd out, but it doesn't feel like I'm having a great deal of luck with that right now. A couple of these other larger chunks of material that I just picked up actually were kind of snapping in my fingers as I was picking them up. So here and there's going to be other pumpkin stems like this one, definitely not as big as that one that we pulled out in the beginning. But I'm starting to get that sense that we might have managed to unearth most of the large slow composting food items that have been down here in the system for quite some time now. Most of my systems, if they were this age, 300 days of age, I would definitely be looking to get them geared up for harvest. But this is by far the largest of my systems, and the way these systems are meant to operate is that you don't kind of have a start and a finish. It's perpetual in a way, so you keep loading materials in through the top here, and then eventually you make your way down to the bottom of the system where there's a little flap that opens up where you can eject the finished castings and make room so that the system can continue that way. That's how they get that continuous flow designation when you have a system like this. And it's funny because the last time I ran this system, it was in service for 700 days, and on day 700 I brought it to an end, but I did so as if I was just emptying a regular container, like a bus bin or a bucket or something, just pulling all the material back out through the top. Never even operating the harvest panel, which is the official name that the manufacturer gives to that hatch on the bottom that opens up so you can remove contents of the system. Down here is even somewhat drier looking stuff. I've kind of made it a rule to not excavate too deep in this system, but that just the appearance of that material kind of made me question whether I would want to maybe occasionally probe down deeper just to make sure everything looks okay. I think that's just somewhat drier material because I have been sort of limiting my excavation depth. And last time it did seem to me like I might have gone a little bit deeper than I do sometimes. And nice little lemon or lime, whatever that is. That wouldn't really classify as one of the slow composting items, but it must have been probably part of the last feeding, and it's showing up as leftovers. So I just encountered a couple more large objects here that I wanted to fish out. And that's a good bit of leftovers, right? But, you know, some of this stuff even predates the existence of this system, or the operation of this round in this bag system, such as this. This stem of a pumpkin actually sat in the system that some of these worms were recruited from, so that pumpkin stem is probably well over a year in terms of how long it's been composting in the worm bins. So let's feed in such a way that we provide ourselves a nice little hole in the middle into which we can place the old and the new foods. You know, the other day I spent all this time shredding paper and cardboard, but then all that material ended up getting, oh, look at that, all these worms down here. All that material got used to build new systems and to replenish my bedding, my prepared bedding supply. So I'm thinking maybe we got to go grab my prepared bedding supply so we can include a little bit of shredded paper, cardboard, and leafy mixture to accompany today's feeding. And I believe we've created a hole big enough into which we can fit a nice, generous feeding. So let's go grab that shredded paper, cardboard mix now. So in addition to the shredded paper, cardboard, leafy mixture that I went to go fetch, along the way I bumped into a couple soiled paper towels and napkins that I thought we can also include down here in the feeding zone. So let's get them in here as sort of a foundational layer into which perhaps we can begin by returning all the old stuff, of which there's a good bit of stuff. Yeah, and perhaps coating this with well, you know what, I got this stuff here I'd like to get rid of, which is the stuff that doesn't screen through the kitchen strainer when I make my worm chow. And this is the worm chow, this is the consistency that I'm after. Anything that doesn't grind up small enough, I exclude. And then perhaps even before we place in today's generous feeding, as you can see, it's a good amount of stuff. Let's grab the prepared bedding and let's see. One end of it, I believe, is the old stuff over here, and I think this end of it is the new stuff that I prepared. So I'll typically go after the older, more aged prepared bedding, and it does seem like we could be fairly generous in here, except I'd like to not have the food sticking out of the top surface, so perhaps we'll leave it at that so that we're hopefully left with enough material at the end with which we can cover up the feeding zone. So let's see, this is I'm not even sure what all this stuff is. A lot of times I'm feeding things that were donated by my mom, and I just sort of grab the little Ziplocs of different foods that she gives me, and sometimes just combine them into a larger assortment of stuff. And I don't always take note of what everything is. As you can see, the stuff is beginning to thaw out and melt. So I'm sprinkling in a little bit of this pulverized eggshell as grit, and then capping off the feeding with a day's worth of coffee. And at the end we'll use this coffee filter as our feeding zone indicator. But before we do that, I always like to dress up these applications of coffee with a little bit of worm chow too. And this to me is starting to look like a fairly generous feeding. And you know what? I think I'm just going to go for one more sprinkling of prepared bedding across the top surface here. Just for good measure, since it is sort of a milestone day and a little bit of a celebration. We'll give them a little bit of bonus bedding to boot. So I think that's it. Let's see if we've got enough material out here on the edges to conceal this feeding zone and hopefully keep out these little pesky flying insects. So I've been coming back in here periodically to apply a little bit more here, a little bit more there. So that's pretty much the extent of my check-ins. I typically don't even really lift up the plastic coverings to peek in under the plastic. But I believe that my future applications of the Mosquito Dunks solution are going to include spraying the flaps of fabric where maybe some of these flying insects are hiding. And I'm not even sure, maybe I'm just imagining, but when I do that, every time I sort of start spraying underneath those little flaps of fabric, it does almost appear to me like a larger quantity of little flying insects appear in the air. So maybe they are actually getting you know, run out of their little hidey holes, and maybe that is where a large part of our issue exists. So we usually don't use feeding zone indicators down here in the VermiBag Mini, but what the heck, let's give them one. So back on the same way we found it goes the plastic covering. The whole idea with covering it the way we did was to allow for the top surface to dry out a little bit, possibly reducing the level of interest for the flying insects, but I'm not even sure if this is really helping much, because I definitely saw a good many flying insects hanging out right underneath this plastic and even around it. So whether it's actually working the way I thought, I don't know, but whatever. We'll just leave it this way for now and hope for the best. All right, everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.